So, welcome. Thank you very much to the Ministry, to the University and also to the Austrian Embassy for inviting me, inviting Ars Electronica and supporting this very interesting platform of exchange between Ars Electronica and the university. It is actually a relationship that has already some tradition and history, especially in the person of Mariano Sardon, who was participating in international Ars Electronica exhibitions many years ago already in Mexico City. But I also had the opportunity to visit the university 4 years ago, and I was very impressed with all the activities going on here, and I hope we can use this as a very good start for even more collaboration in the future. I would like to use the opportunity for two things: to introduce you a little bit to Ars Electronica, our activities, our philosophy, and then also to talk with you a little bit about this very interesting but also very confusing field of art and science, of hybrid art. So this is the overview of what Ars Electronica is and what Ars Electronica does, and actually I think the only way you can describe Ars Electronica is by describing it as a hybrid organization in itself, which has much to do that Ars Electronica was, so to say, really growing together with this so-called digital revolution. When Ars Electronica was founded in 1979, so 36 years ago, I think, well, most of you were not even here on this planet yet at this time, and so was also not the personal computer. So 1979 was even 2 years before IBM started to sell the PC, the personal computer. So in a certain way, it really was stone age of technology, and I think it's quite interesting that already at this time, some people had the idea to make a festival for art, technology, and society. And of course, one can speculate a lot, how did this happen in this very small town in Austria, Austria in the middle of Europe, all the nice Alps, very traditional type of people and thinking. And then there are some people who have the idea that once the computer might become much more than just a tool or instrument for engineers, scientists, or for the industry, but that it would become a driving force for a new culture and new society. Well, one explanation is, of course, that they were really geniuses. The other explanation could be that one of them was a scientist, one of them was an artist, and one of them was a journalist. And so I think at the end, they couldn't get to terms in discussing whether they should make an art festival, a scientific conference, or some spectacle for many people. And so at the end, to come to terms, they said, well, okay, let's call it Festival for Art, Technology and Society. No matter which part of the story you like better, it was the moment where this hybrid character of Ars Electronica started. And this is, so to say, the basic element of all our activities since then. I will introduce later a little bit all these different activities, but the important part here is to see when it started. We have 2 activities that are still going on, the festival and the competition, that are dedicated to the field of arts. We have the Ars Electronica Center, that is an educational institution, and we have many activities that are related very specifically to the research development of new projects together with artists and together also with the industry. Just to give you a few organizational information, we are organized as a company limited, 100% owned by the city of Linz. We have a turnover of 14 to 15 million euros, and 30 to 40% of this money comes from public spending, which means more than 60% of our budget we are able to earn on ourselves with all our activities. We have 190 staff members, meanwhile, in all these different departments that we are running. just again to describe briefly the major activities. Of course, the festival is the mothership of Ars Electronica since 1979. It features a broad variety of exhibitions, lectures, concerts, performances, events in the public space, but maybe the most important part from the very beginning was that it had very future-oriented topics every year, and thus it really introduced this idea of thinking about the future and having artists, scientists, designers, engineers sitting together in conferences, in exhibitions, in performances to speculate about the future. So already in 1990 about virtual reality, 1992 nanotechnology, and you see some of the key developments of technology and sciences have been introduced on a broad scale to the audience in Linz, because a very important part of Ars Electronica from the beginning is again this duality of very sophisticated, one has to say elitish events. You know, when you bring a bunch of scientists and artists to discuss about nanotechnology, I mean, you can imagine how many people attend the conference. Of course, you can invite a lot of people from all over the world, and that's a great thing, because Ars Electronica started so early, many people from all over the world are coming. But when you want to create an impact on the place where you are acting, well, then you have to reach out for the local people. And then, you know, just think back, 1992, starting to discuss with people nanotechnology and what arts has to do with it. So no way that you are able to reach out for the people. So from the very beginning, the concept of Ars Electronica was to have also very attractive, large-scale events in the public space, which are not always, you know, on the highest level of artistic sophistication, but those events in a very spectacular, popular way are also dedicated to the same topics in the festival. But of course they communicate it in a much easier way. The great thing is that with these events and the support of the media in Linz and in Austria, from the very beginning already, from '79, they have been able to attract up to 100,000 people from all over the city and the region around to attend this festival. And since I think you are also very known to the complicated situation of selling art to the sponsors or to the governments, again, when you have 300 people discussing in a conference about the future, it's difficult to convince the politicians that this is really a successful event. But when you have 100,000 people gathering for your major opening event, that's something that really works with politicians and with sponsors. So it's on the one side a kind of very pragmatic approach to try to establish these very, so to say, sharp forward-thinking events within an environment that allowed us to reach out for many more people and be really on a very attractive level with these activities. And I would like on this point to maybe show you some images from this year's festival, just a few ones. This year we had the topic post-city. It was the consideration of the habitat of the 21st century. And we had a wonderful situation that we were able to get a very huge building, which was a former postal office. I mean, not like this one, which was the administration, but one that was built to be the distribution center. So where all the letters and parcels are coming and then they are going. So in this former distribution center of the Austrian Postal Service, we were able to host the festival this year. This is about 100,000 square meters of space that we got available for this, and these are some images how it looked when we got it, and they still had all this great infrastructure, the conveyor belts and these spiral slides, and this is what we made out of it. So we installed a kind of what we called a pop-up city. We made a city inside this building, a city environment, playing with the notion of city that was at the same time exhibition space, presentation for projects, concert hall, conference spaces, These are some images from outside, because still nowadays we do a lot of outside presentations, but not only big conferences, but also many small gatherings and workshops are taking place throughout the festival. It is, of course, a very social event as well. We have concerts and performances, so we could again use these vast spaces for very interesting artistic presentations. So just some images from the artworks that were presented there. So these are images from our Ars Electronica Center, which is always every year a big part of the festival program. This is a huge projection space that we developed. The floor and the wall each has 16 by 9 meters. And each, again, the floor and the wall is capable of 8K stereoscopic presentations. So for those who know what 8K stereoscopic means, I want to hear a wow, because this is the first and the only one worldwide that is working. I would say barely working. Of course, many difficulties, but it's extremely technical challenges, because with this performance, already the cables and the connectors of your system start to be a problem. To be able to show these images, we have to transmit every second the same amount of data that is usually stored on a Blu-ray disc. And then on a Blu-ray disc you can have up to 4 hours video. And this amount of data every second generated in the computer and sent to the projectors. So we are quite excited actually that it works. You hear it when I talk about it. And it allows us, and this is something what you see here, not only wonderful artistic presentations, but also really challenging collaborations with the sciences. This is a joint project with Siemens Healthcare and the Princeton University in the United States, where cinematic rendering, this type of rendering that is usually developed to, for Hollywood movies like, I don't know, Lord of the Rings and these kind of things, to introduce these rendering technologies on real-time data from the medicine. So this is not a standard model, computer model of a human body. This is the MRI scan, or in this case it's a CT scan from a human body, from a patient from the hospital. And they put the person into the tube. The moment they have the data, we can connect it to our computer and immediately have it, for example, displayed here in this huge scale projection. These are again these images from this year's big outdoor event. So you see there is a lot of spectacle going on. And of course, Ars Electronica has meanwhile also created a lot of very interesting links to the industry. I will come back a little bit later to this photo and what the special part of this photo is. Just some other impressions of the festival this year. The festival is taking place every year in the first week of September. So if you are planning your next trip to Europe, I would of course strongly invite you to consider to come and visit us. Because the festival is also the time in the year where we present the prize winners of our international award competition. The Ars Electronica started in 1987. It was the first international award competition for art made with the computer. And still up until now, it is the most highly prized competition. We have 3,000 to 4,000 submissions every year in all these categories. It is really a kind of who is who of the most renowned and maybe most important, not only artists as you see, but also innovators and influential people in the field of media technology, of internet, of social media. For example, people like Tim Berners-Lee or Linus Torvalds, but also many of the important artists. So the festival and the as I told you, they are dedicated to the arts. But in 1996, when the first Ars Electronica Center was opened, the idea was not to make a museum that would collect and exhibit the most beautiful and most interesting pieces of digital art, but a place that understands itself as an educational place. That's why we call it the Museum of the Future, or also the School for the Future. And the idea is to use the artistic projects and exhibit them not because they are such great art pieces, but because they have this extreme strong quality to explain and educate the people how to cope with these new technologies, to give people an idea of the meaning of new technologies, to help to get people from being just consumers of technology to maybe even become not just participants but creators as well. So the idea is already a kind of very hybrid one. You support the art in the festival, but then you use it, you utilize it, and of course that's a very critical concept, of course. You utilize it for educational purposes. But what we of course immediately learned with our activities when we started the Future Lab, a bunch of hackers, artists, designers started to work on our own exhibitions, we immediately recognized a very big interest from the industry, because they saw that we are capable of doing things with this new technology, with visualization, with interactive interfaces, that they also thought could be interesting very much for their development as well. And I think this is the second very important part of our hybridization, is that with a special department in our institution, we are collaborating with many big and small companies all over the world, but also, as you see on the right side here, also with many universities and large-scale research institutions. Namely, we are of course very proud that we have artist in residence programs together with CERN, the big scientific research center in Geneva, where they have the long particle accelerator and hadron collider, but also with ESA, the European Space Agency, and ESO. Those are the guys who actually work in Chile on the big telescopes to look out there into the world. The type of projects that we make on this, so to say, cutting edge towards the business and the industry ranges from, I would say, pretty normal creative industry stuff. So when a company asks us, like this is a medical technology company, and they asked us to create a museum, a brand land for their headquarters, then we are developing this kind of exhibition scenarios. The same we are also doing for museums. A little bit more interesting, I think, is it when we are not just creating displays or interactive scenarios for exhibitions, but when we really go in a kind of research and development with companies. And I think that's a very interesting example. This is an interactive shopping wall. And the important part here, why I show this piece, is there is a big company in Austria that they became big by building the furniture for shops, tables, shelves, and all this kind of thing. And they recognized, oops, there is slowly something changing. There is the internet, there is the computer, there are all these screens. So how can we evolve as a company to be able to cope with this new business environment? And they came to Ars Electronica and asked us, so for about a year we were collaborating with them on different concepts. This usually starts with types of workshops and brainstormings with the people in the company. And the important point here was, of course, to communicate to them that for the business of the future, for the retail store of the future, the most important thing might be to understand that it's no longer just a point of sales, but it has to become a point of confidence. And then the next step is, what does this mean? How could this kind of idea be translated into products? And this is usually what we are trying to do, from the brainstorming, from the concept to the working prototype. This is the kind of the way that we go together with the companies. There is another example of this exhibition design. This is a huge installation in the airport in Vienna that we did together with several international artists. That's again really huge scale media art interactive installation for the office building of a very big German software company. And again, these are now the things that I think are more interesting and challenging, because they also challenge us to think, what is art actually doing? What can art be used for? Should art be used for everything, And you might have recognized last year there was a big buzz in the media that Land Rover and Jaguar, they came up with cars that have this very new technology of for car navigation, where you are not showing a little roadmap on the display of the car navigation, but where you, so to say, project into the windshield a virtual guiding line that is telling you where you have to go. The interesting thing why I mentioned this is that already 12 years before, this very idea was developed and also realized as a working prototype in a research of Siemens Germany together with the Ars Electronica Future Lab. And the very interesting thing is, when you think back the time when car navigation became popular, it was already at this time in the beginning of the 2000s, it was really a big business. Millions of dollars or euros had been invested by car manufacturers, but also by electronic companies to create car navigation. But the only thing that they came up with was a little screen in the car showing a roadmap. And I think we all know how difficult it is for us to interpret a roadmap. Just look at tourists or ourselves when we are in a new city, in a different city, and we try to find orientation with a roadmap. It's very difficult. And then you should use this while you're driving a car, maybe even in a very busy inner city traffic. So the next best idea the industry came up with was having a voice that tells you, turn right in 300 meters. Turn right in 200 meters. Who the hell is able to tell what 200 meters is? When I ask you to tell me how big is this room, there might be some people after 10, 15 seconds you can tell it, because you say, okay, might be, maybe 20 meters or whatsoever. I'm very bad in this anyway. But when you have to think while you are driving, where is 200 meters? No way to get it right. And nobody ever before had this very simple idea that instead of using just a stupid roadmap here on a little screen, why don't you do it like this? You project it into the windshield of the car, like a virtual guiding line, or even much, much simpler, you have a virtual follow me car. And when this car blinks right and turns to the right, you don't have to think north, east, south, west, left, right. You just follow it. The interesting point for me why I talk about this project quite lengthy always is because, of course, what we see here has nothing to do with art. This is not a piece of art in no means. But it was only possible to, so to say, break this barrier towards a more intuitive, human-centered way of showing information because of the contribution of artists. The engineers, the designers, the scientists of this very big company. Siemens Germany is one of the largest companies worldwide. They spent huge amount of money for this. But they were just not able. They were not able to think out of the box, as we usually say. When they thought about car navigation, they were thinking about north, south, coordinates, left, right, directions, and this kind of things. We put the artists in the team, and within one day, we had a completely different solution. And now we are approaching a time where this question of communication between machines and humans is getting more and more and more and more important. Because we are approaching a time where we have an increasing number of half autonomous machines. Not really intelligent machines. I think we still can be quite relaxed. We don't really have to be afraid that these robots will outsmart us very soon. But the problem is, as long as these machines are not smart and intelligent enough, we have to adapt to them. So our intelligence has to replace the missing intelligence in the machines. So this is a process of communication that has to be facilitated. And one of the first big research projects around 2010, 2011, where we learned how much the artistic contribution can do here was a long-term research project with Honda related to this Asimo robot. And I think you all know the Asimo. It's, I think, the most famous biped humanoid robot, and it's really cute. It's a super nice robot. It's like, you know, looks like a 12-year-old boy, and it always has this nice little careful move. So it really, you see it, and you have to like it. And the interesting thing is the guys from Honda, when they developed it, they never worked with sociologists or psychologists or anything. It was just the engineers working. And for this, I think they did it pretty well. And they thought, of course, the more they make the robot being able to use human gestures, you know, look like a human, or when you approach Asimo, it starts to wave, then it makes like this, and when you're in front of it, you know, the spectacular thing happens. Asimo stretches out the hand. And I was in this situation when we started this collaboration. We were invited to visit the research center in the north of Tokyo, in Chiba, and we were going into this entrance hall, and there was Asimo on the other side, waving to me, doing like this, and I was going, you know. And then Asimo gave me the hand, and I mean, I have to tell you, I'm an engineer. I have a very profound technical education. I know what this machine does and how it's built. But when Asimo stretched the hand, what did I do? I started to smile and shook his hand. I mean, imagine a grown-up engineer shaking the hand and smiling to a bunch of cables, wires, plastics, screws, and things like this. The really terrible thing is, after this handshake, Asimo's repertoire of communication is over. And then you stand there, and you really feel like an idiot. Because now you expect, you know, when I go down to one of you and we shake hands, this means something. Even if it's just an informal reception, shaking hand is the barrier that we, so to say, break through. This is the moment where we somehow commit to stay, to be polite, maybe even get close in touch with each other. So we expect something. All these expectations are, of course, also raising in humans when they get in touch with this robot. But then the only thing Asimo is doing, waving the hand again, and then Asimo is waiting that you instruct him, what to do. And then the whole the miserable thing starts. So what Honda recognized is that this sort of the overemphasis of the human gestures actually was totally counterproductive. And so we started to investigate with them how the environment in which robots and people are meeting each other, how this can be also used to, so to say, bridge this gap and fill this lack of responsive communication that the robot can do. And even the little things like green, orange and red, like a traffic light, you see it over there, started to help a lot. Because for us, the most difficult thing is when we instruct the robot, and the robot has actually a fairly good voice recognition. But you never really know, did the robot understand me? Or do I have to repeat it again, and all these kind of things. So this was a very interesting development, and together with a second very interesting development that we did recently, these Spaxels, we were working together as a next step with Daimler, the big German car manufacturer. And what we did with them is to work on this very interesting question: how can we communicate with these autonomous cars? Because again, the autonomous car is nothing else than a robot, and we have pretty much the same problems that we have with any other type of robot. Again, the very interesting situation here is when we are on the street as pedestrians and we see a car coming towards us. Then, depending on the country, the culture you live, I think it's a little bit different between Argentina and Europe. It's much more different. For example, I was recently in Tehran. Traffic works completely different there than in Europe. It doesn't mean anything when there is a zebra crossing or a red traffic light. Forget about it. The only thing you can do is getting, with all your energy stepping on the street and hoping the car will stop, and it works. It's really great. In Austria, of course, you have to do it completely differently. But no matter where we are, we have a very elaborated culture and routine of how to deal with the situation. And it has much to do with looking into the car, kind of seeing the person behind the steering wheel. And some might say, you know, if this is a young guy with long dreadlocks, well, maybe you should be careful. Others would say if it's a 50-year-old guy wearing a hat, ooh, you should be careful. So the interesting thing is no matter how wrong your perception and your judgment of the person is, for you it gives you a kind of guidance and feeling of security and safety because you can judge the situation. But the moment, of course, when a car looks like this, and you don't even see inside the car, or maybe even worse, when you look inside the car and you see, there is nobody behind the steering wheel. Now, how should we understand, is it safe for us to approach the street or not? How should the car understand it? That's also a big issue. But the even more important point is, I think, again, here this question, how can the people understand it? And of course, there are many ideas you can have, like a kind of display in the car. But the very idea that I like so much was this idea that came out in this research collaboration between the Future Lab and Siemens, is the car gets slower, stops, and then it projects a virtual zebra stripe. So there is a laser projector in the front of the car, in the grille of the car, and it projects the zebra stripe, and then the zebra stripe even starts to move like a conveyor belt. So you know, okay, now it's your situation. Now it's you can go over the street, and when the conveyor belt gets faster, it in a nice way tells you how you can or that you should get faster now and maybe speed up because, of course, the car also wants to go. And we have heard about this recently. It's actually quite difficult at the moment for autonomous cars. They are way too polite. I think it was probably also here in the media, all over Europe and the United States, there was this thing that a Google self-driving car had been pulled over by the police because it was driving too slow and too careful. I think that's the first car ever that has been pulled over by the police for this. But again, I think it shows in a nice way the kind of difficulties that we are expecting here. So let's see if I can get back to the... So how did we do this research together with Mercedes? I told you we have developed this flying quadrocopters. Actually, usually we use them for spectacular outdoor events. So each of them has a special LED system, is equipped with GPS, so each of these quadrocopters knows exactly where it is located and where the other, so they can really dance, so to say, a kind of choreography. They're like a huge holographic screen in the sky, and as I said, this is developed for this kind of outdoor performances. But then we were using them in a research setting with Mercedes, where it was about to understand how are people reacting to these autonomous flying machines or these autonomous moving machines. And the first attempt that Mercedes did was with kind of these little vacuum cleaner robots, you know, the little discs that are driving on the floor and doing vacuum cleaning. But the problem was you are not afraid of this kind of things. You know, when you have this little disc on the floor approaching you, I mean, you don't get afraid because you just have to do like this and it's gone. But when you have these quadrocopters flying in the height of your eyes with the very nasty sound, then you actually really get a little bit more careful. And so we had a space like this, some of these quadrocopters just flying their own program, and then we asked people to move in and we're just watching how they would behave. Next step was giving people some information of, you know, how they could use maybe certain gestures, you know, try to stop the drone or try to send it away. And of course, we could observe how people were using these gestures. The next step was in the first part, when somebody made like this or this, the robot came, stopped, and just went back. And the next iteration was that the robot was coming, somebody made like this or like this, then the robot stopped, made a little wiggle, so like as if you would nod with your head, and then was gracefully turning away in a very nice curve. And of course, I think it doesn't need any interpretation here, but it was much more successful when people got this response, this feedback from the machine as well. So the moment they saw that the robot has understood my gesture, this was the point where communication really started. And again, I think from all these different kind of ideas, what we can learn is that there is a certain quality inside the artistic work that has not necessarily to do with the usual work of artists. So again, this is not an art piece, this is not the artistic work, but it was only possible because there is a very special way of approaching things, thinking about things that is coming from the arts. So what we are trying right now, when we think about this hybrid situation between art and technology, art and science, art and business, art and industry, how can we create an ecosystem where we can support the artists in an unconditional way to create what they should create, art. And art is art and nothing else. There has to be a very clear, there has been no discussion at all. The moment we try to make art useful, the moment we force art to be useful, the moment it's dead, it's no longer useful. This is this very nice paradox thing. Art is only useful if it's useless. Sounds pretty banal and stupid, but in reality that's a super important point, and this is actually the most difficult thing in the discussions about this. So we tried with our different elements in our institution to build up this ecosystem, not just a value creation system, where you would exploit the arts and then convert and transfer it into these different steps of exploitable products and services, but where we also make sure there is a very strong feedback into this. Because I truly believe in the situation that art and creativity is one of the most important raw materials of the future. But the important thing, of course, it's not a raw material that you just can dig out of the ground like you would do with oil or coal or iron ore or whatsoever. It's a raw material, a resource that you always have to build up. And this is usually when you talk to business people. That's the end of the discussion. Because they often come to us and say, yeah, you have all these creative people, these artists, can they help us to make a new product? So they always just want to take, everybody wants to take a piece of the cake, but nobody is considering to be responsible for baking the cake, making it. And I think this is a very big challenge for art institutions, because it's not only changing the way how artists are working in our society, but also how we as art institutions have to work. So when it comes to this collaboration of art and science, there are really many, many things we could benefit from. I mean, there is this whole area of social innovation that can come from this, encouragement, empowerment. We have, of course, also the opportunity to really innovate new products, new types of services. So there is this many different areas that we can have, so to say, spillover effects and benefits from this collaboration. The idea is a very old one, but so far it has mainly seen as kind of thing, just bring these sectors together. So this is this kind of, I would say, interdisciplinary approach of the 90s. If we have art and design, technology and science, bring the people together, maybe create some lab, and when they work together, something will happen. But I think nowadays we really have to go 2 steps further, because the only way why this collaboration is so interesting is because of its benefit for society. And I really see here both things, social innovation as well as technological or business innovation. But what we also learned in these many years, and As you have seen, we are doing this since 20 years now with the Future Lab. It also needs this catalytic activity situation. If you just put the things together in a room or on a table, it's not really working. And art can really be this catalyst to make this collaboration successful. And there have been also historically very interesting approaches to this. I think many of you are familiar with the concept of design thinking. It has been, so there's the big breakthrough of the 90s. It was a wonderful way to solve problems, to come from a problem to a solution in a structured way on the one side, but introducing the artistic, creative, out-of-the-box approach to come to solutions. But nowadays, I think in our situation where we are facing so completely new challenges, where we have all these transformations into high-tech society, all this transformation on the global economic, ecological, and also political scale, the main issue is not so much to solve the problem, because to be able to solve the problem, first you have to see the problem. And again, this sounds pretty banal, but in reality, it's one of the crucial things. What we need right now is a mechanism or a method that helps, whether it's governments, NGOs, or companies, that helps to, so to say, amidst all these changes, these transformations going on, to find the direction, to find the new direction, and to see, as the saying goes, to see the crisis as a possibility. And so what we have been introducing as a method in the collaboration is the idea of art thinking, which is of course playing a little bit with the notion of design thinking, but not to replace it, but as a kind of, so to say, preparation that helps you to see the possibilities that are arising from the changing situations, and instead of coming up with a creative solution for a problem, the even more important point is the creative question. And this is, again, when you look at issues like the car navigation, or when you look at the Mercedes-Benz example, then one of the very important points was not to help Mercedes to go in a better way from A to B, but so to say, to stop them working on these issues and go back to the beginning and start to think in a very basic way about this relation of humans and machines. Not to think about the car. You can try it yourself. Go to Google and type in autonomous car. You get hundreds of articles and photos that all of them are only telling the problems of the car. How can the car read the street? How can the car brake faster? How can the car do this? And you will find nothing that talks about how is it in the mind and even emotionally for the people who are not sitting in the car, but the people who are outside of the machine. And when we consider how much in the future we will be confronted with autonomous or semi-autonomous systems, then I think it's becoming more and more clear that we really need a different way of approaching this. And again, as long as I think, as we are able to see this as an ecosystem, I think there is a pretty good chance to make a meaningful collaboration between the art and the science possible, in a way that art is not exploited itself, but in a way that a certain energy, a spirit that can grow out of the artistic thinking, that this can be made useful for education, for social innovation, but also for products and services. It might even be a new market for artists, because I think everybody who has been working in the field of art and technology or media art in the recent time already knows it very well. There is not very much place in the traditional art market for this type of art. Maybe in the future it will change, but for the time being it's not very likely. And so again, considering this kind of very difficult situation, we actually would need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lectures like this, because we would have to be, or we should make much more differentiated approach to this. What is really, when we are talking about art, technology and science, just to sort of say at the end, make you aware again, we are talking about a completely, let's say, a very dynamic and still very much changing situation. I mean, the whole thing with art and new media, let's say it started in the 80s, it's just a very short time that we have become used to work with this, and still we have to find out where in all these collaborations at the end, where the art finds its position. I think it's a very interesting, not only challenging, but also interesting and beneficial situation. It gives us a lot of opportunities to maybe reinstate the value of art in a different way in our society. Because you have seen all the big companies that are approaching Ars Electronica to collaborate with us. And I always ask myself, how desperate do these companies have to be that they end up with asking artists for help? I mean, imagine a super rich company like Siemens, Mercedes, Toyota, all these big companies. They have spent millions of dollars in the recent years with all the consulting from the big consulting companies. They have spent another list of millions of dollars to work with technical universities. And it appears that they didn't get the answers, the directions they were looking for. So finally they end up to work with artists. It might be just a short window of opportunity, so we could approach it and say, take the money and run. I advise you that's a good approach, because for artists that's always most important, but maybe also it is a time where we can really rethink the role of art, not just as a luxury good of society that is not really necessary, but maybe regain this notion of art as being really one of the central driving forces of our society. So thank you very much for your attention, and whenever you come to Europe, please visit us in Linz. Thank you.